War is hell. It reaches every hand, from the soldier in the trench to the nurse at his side, from the engineer forging weapons to the families left behind. These are their stories. This is World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches. Today's episode, The Ladle Never Sleeps. The singing was sporadic and loud. The sea of men marching before him could barely hold a tune, the excitement so evident it was contagious. Eamon Flaherty could not help but smile from his vantage point atop the cook wagon, which slowly trudged along behind the line of men. He wiped his brow and looked up into the high August sky, then took a moment to savor the beauty of the French countryside all around him, the lush green hills, the flower fields. Until 2 weeks ago, he had never been out of Ireland. Since then, he had seen the mountainous British terrain, London, the English Channel, and now France. Soon, he would also see Belgium. He wondered if he would even notice a difference. "Flaherty, keep your eyes on those horses, not the sky." The voice broke him from his trance. It was Mac, the lead cook and his immediate supervisor. Eamon's head snapped back to paying attention to the team of horses and the road before him. "Look, I get it. You haven't been out of Ireland and everything looks different, but you're driving one of 2 cook wagons we have, and if you go off the road and damage it, all those guys in front of us are going to be right pissed," Matt continued. At 27 years old, Eamon had always wanted to travel, to see the world. Now, here he was, driving a cook wagon through the French countryside, and because of the war, he could not even enjoy it. The cook teams had been hastily put together by command. They had been halfway across the channel when a captain realized they had 2 cook wagons, but no cooks, an oversight that was common during rapid mobilization and deployment. The commanding officers had pulled all aboard. "What was your pre-war job?" they had asked. When they got to Eamon, he informed them that he had been an assistant cook with a hotel. "Come with us," they had said, and he had followed. They had been marching for just over a week. He was often left alone with his thoughts most of the time as they went. During those times, he often wondered why the soldiers were on foot and not in transport vehicles. Sometimes, the road sat adjacent to railroad tracks, and he wondered why they had not been loaded onto train cars for the journey. In the end, it did not matter. The Army's decisions were just that, the Army's decisions. One thing that he had learned along the journey was to enjoy the march, because when they stopped, he was faced with the feeding of thousands of men morning, afternoon, and night, and that was a daunting and stressful task. It was a task that Eamon had not signed up for. He had wanted to fight. A bugle call cut through the jovial singing. The men silenced and began to slow and peel off the road, many of them instantly removing their packs and lying down with their heads on them. The bugle signaled rest for the marching men, but it signaled something else for Eamon. It was lunchtime. Time to get to work. He glanced down at Mac to see him already looking up at him. "Go left, let's get off the road and set up," Mac ordered. Eamon scanned the ground close to the road for a proper place to park the wagon. He needed as level a patch as he could find, but also a spot for the horses to roam and graze when they were let loose. He quickly decided on a patch of dirt surrounded by grass and some flowers. He soon found that this patch of dirt was large enough for both wagons, as they were quickly joined by the second team of cooks. He dropped from the seat of the wagon and quickly unharnessed the 2 horses who had spent the morning pulling them. Afterwards, he made his way to the rear of the wagon, where he unlatched a clasp that allowed the back to drop down into a makeshift table/cutting board and workstation. He turned to see the quartermaster wagon post up nearby, followed by 3 supply wagons. These wagons were much larger than the cook wagons and required 4 horses apiece to pull them. He was soon joined by two other men on the cook team, Corporal Harold Potts and Private Alfred Biggs. He had met them on the steamer crossing the channel, along with Matthew "Mac" Drayton, their sergeant and supervisor. They had been bringing up the rear between their cook wagon and the second cook wagon, which had its own team of 4 men. They were already carrying boxes that they had procured from the supply wagon.
"That was fast," Mac uttered.
It was Alfred that answered. The quartermaster already had it staged at the supply wagon. We got there first." Alfred was the younger of the two at only 19 years old. He had recently started serving food at a grammar school and helping in the kitchen just before the war. He had also joined to fight, but unlike Eamon, was not upset about this new assignment.
"What do we have?" Eamon asked.
Harold and Alfred sat the boxes down and began to rummage through them. It was Harold who spoke next. "Bread, some cheese, and some cold roast beef."
"Sandwiches it is," added Mac. "Let's get to it."
Alfred jumped into the wagon and began the process of removing the insulated container in which the tea that had been brewed that morning was stored. It took all 3 of them, Alfred, Eamon, and Harold, to lift it out of the wagon and into a position where Alfred could ladle it into tins for the oncoming lunch service. When this was complete, Eamon helped Harold transfer the lunch items to the tailboard. They would use this as a workstation. Here, they would slice the bread, meat, and cheese for serving. Mac had undone some clasps along the side of the wagon, which allowed another table to drop down. This table hung from chains and would allow the men to transfer the cut bread, meat, and cheeses from the tailboard for distribution to the hungry marchers. Less than 10 minutes later, the bugles sounded again. It was time. Eamon watched as men started to rise and make their way to the wagons. Long lines formed at each wagon, and the cook teams began their assigned duties. Mac kept the soldiers in line and tried to make sure that no man was served twice. Eamon stood before the lower table along the side of the wagon with Harold. Eamon putting cheese and meat in their tins, and Harold handing them the slices of bread before the men moved on to Alfred, who would ladle the tea into their cups. After a man was served, Mac would continue to keep an eye on him. He wanted the men to leave the wagon area altogether. The likelihood of a man re-entering the line to get more food was rare, but not unheard of. After a week of this routine 3 times a day, Eamon was starting to recognize some of the men that came through the line. All young, all jovial, and all eager for action, an attitude that was also contagious. Some would jest with the young cooks as they made their way through the line. Usually, little quips about their mother's cooking being better than theirs, but it was all in fun. Within a half an hour, the men and the wagons were back on the road, heading for a date with the Germans. This time, Harold would drive and Eamon would walk with Alfred behind the wagon. Their job? To make sure that the clasp holding the tailboard did not come loose, causing items to fall off during the journey. Ahead, again, he could hear the singing. He wished he had been taught how to use a straight razor because the hair on his chin itched like the dickens, and he wished he knew how to shave it off. Standing with Mac at the quartermaster's tent, he scratched relentlessly at it. Mac looked at him impatiently. "Knock that off." "I wish I could, Sarge." Eamon had took to calling him Sarge. It felt more formal than Mac. Mac looked at him sternly. "Do you want these guys to think you have lice? You're serving their food. Hell, if the quartermaster sees you doing that, he's likely to report it." His face softened a bit. "Just try to hold the scratching until we get the onions, okay?" Eamon dropped his arms to his side. "I'll try, Sarge, but it'll be a challenge." At that moment, the quartermaster, Sergeant Johnson, appeared with 2 bags. Mac looked confused. 2 bags? Johnson smiled. "1 onion, like you asked for, and we got some potatoes in, so I thought you would want some." This was a surprise, Potatoes were not something that the military preferred to carry. They bruised, sprouted, and rotted faster than other foods, and quartermasters also preferred foods that were more durable. Eamon was excited now. He instantly thought of a stew made with potatoes, onions, and bully beef. Tonight's dinner would be something the men would truly enjoy. He would make the suggestion on the way back to their station. Their cook station was no longer mobile. They had been stationary for well over 2 months now, and that came with its own advantages. Instead of digging fresh fire pits every evening, the cooks had carved a single trench that served as their permanent kitchen. It stretched roughly 6 feet long, 2 feet wide, and just over 2 feet deep. The sides had been packed hard with mud and lined with stones where they could find them, and the bottom was always black with ash. A fire was kept burning day and night, the coals banked when not in use and fanned back to life by morning. Across the top of the trench, long iron bars had been set on wooden frames and hammered into the ground. The bars rested just high enough above the flame to hold the soot-blackened cauldrons that simmered constantly. Water for tea, stew for the evening, something hot for every man who came through. Along the way back, Mac did agree to the stew. Eamon had given Mac many suggestions over the last few months, suggestions normally met with reluctance. Mac was well known for his penchant for food conservation, and Eamon always wanted to put more protein or vegetables in the meals for the men. As the line formed, Eamon watched eyes widen one by one when the men saw how thick and hearty the stew was. Many men made mention of this as they went through the line. Morale was high. This is what he enjoyed. He was feeding the men who were fighting the war that everyone said would be decided by Christmas, just 2 short months away. Now he sat with his own bowl in hand, surrounded by a handful of familiar faces. They were all privates, like himself, though most still had the softness of boys. Abraham and Peter Saunders, cousins from Cornwall, were never apart. They moved, laughed, and talked in the same rhythm. Chauncey Stewart sat quietly, a devout 19-year-old from York whose Bible was always tucked in his breast pocket. And George Wilson, older at 24 and the only Canadian among them, carried a quiet homesickness that Eamon recognized even without words. Eamon liked them all. In the weeks here, they had become something close to a family. By now, they had all become accustomed to the sound of shell blasts and gunfire in the distance. The sound had become a companion of sorts, sometimes a source of comfort because nobody knew what was happening when it was quiet. George and Chauncey had been to the front, but they told no stories, gave no details. They just said it was interesting. Abraham and Peter had only been here a month and had yet to rotate to the fighting. They were eager to start, much like a lot of men were. Abraham spoke between bites. "Eamon, how did you become a cook in the army?" "Yeah, seems like a pretty comfortable gig," added Chauncey. He laughed, and as he recounted the events on the steamer, he remembered how much he had wanted to fight. That was just a few months ago. He still wished to be at the front, giving it to the Germans, but he was becoming more and more satisfied with his current situation. When he was finished with the story, he added, "This job is pretty stressful, actually." It was then that George, in his usual serious manner, chimed in. "Stressful, sure, but you aren't dodging bullets." This induced a silence from all of them. Peter broke the silence. "I can't wait to go up." He turned to Chauncey and George. "What was it really like up there?" The 2 men looked at each other, but neither spoke right away. Chauncey put his bowl down and took a drink from his tin cup. Then he began. "It's not too bad, I guess. I never went over the top, though. I never even made it to the forward position. But I did see a lot of guys come back hurt. Some guys didn't come back. I didn't go over the top either. I do wonder what that is like," added George. "I bet that's where the real glory is," exclaimed Abraham. Eamon sat and listened to the talk as it continued. George and Chauncey did not share much detail, but they did not paint the rosy picture the cousins expected. But that did not seem to matter to Abraham and Paul. The more they heard, the more excited they seemed to get. When Eamon's head hit the pillow that night, he did not realize just how much would change, and soon. Bacon was another rarity, but this morning it was available. Eamon had chopped the bacon into small bits and added it to the oatmeal he was now serving. Harold stood beside him handing out slices of black bread. Alfred ladled strong coffee into the cups of the men as they passed. As usual, Mac controlled the line of soldiers waiting to get served. After an hour of serving, Paul appeared before him. As if it was muscle memory, Eamon ladled the oatmeal into his tin. Then he noticed something unusual. Abraham was not with him, and he had never seen the cousins separated. Paul took a whiff of the oatmeal. "Is that bacon?" Eamon nodded in the affirmative and smiled and asked, "Where's your cousin?" "He got sent up this morning. Chauncey, too. Not sure about George, but I haven't seen him." Eamon smiled at this. How exciting! He knew that Abraham was eager to go, and naturally he was excited for him. "Yeah, for him. I'm still waiting my turn," Paul returned. "Your time will come. Don't you worry." "That's what they say, but we're supposed to be home by Christmas, and that's a month away." He then watched as Paul moved on through the line as he continued to serve man after man. Soon it was his turn to eat. As usual, he took his bowl and tin cup, which he filled with tea, and searched out his friends. To his surprise, he found Paul sitting with George. He had not seen George go through the line, which was unusual. He must have gone through the other food line. He sat down with the two men. He nodded at Paul again and greeted George. "Morning, George." George looked up, a spoonful of oatmeal in his mouth. He swallowed. "Morning, Eamon. You heard about our boys, I trust." He adjusted on the rock he had sat on next to Paul. "I did. Paul told me. I'm excited for them." George looked at Paul. "Paul, can you do me a favor and go get me some more of that coffee?" "Sure can." Paul took the tin cup from him and sauntered off. George's expression changed when he addressed Eamon. "You need to temper your expectations." This caught Eamon by surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean..." He paused, and then he continued. "Look, I get it. They're excited to see the action. Hell, even you wish you could see action. But it's not all it's cracked up to be up there. It's dangerous and pretty damn scary." "You couldn't say that in front of Paul?" Eamon asked. "I could have, but it's best for him to go up still excited. Naive. You, however, you're in a different position." He was overly curious now. "What do you mean by that?" George looked down into his bowl and stirred what was left of his oatmeal. "I can't explain it to you. It's something you have to experience yourself." Paul approached with a coffee tin and handed it to George. "Thank you, Paul. I would have gotten up myself, but I slept weird on my hip. It hurts." Eamon knew that that was a lie. He knew now that George had asked Paul to leave so they could talk in private. But what was their conversation really for? What was it George expected him to experience? He had plenty of time to think of this. For now, he had breakfast. Eamon had learned many names and faces since he had arrived. It seemed that every day he joked with men he had never seen in the chow line as he ladled various soups and oatmeals into their tin bowls. And each time he finished his tasks and took the time to eat himself, he would seek out George, Paul, or whoever was not up at the front to sit and chat with. However, this afternoon he had not seen one familiar face come through the chow line. As he walked around the camp with his slice of bread, cut of ham, and small wedge of cheese, he saw no one familiar in the sea of faces, except one, George. He sat on the ground next to him. "Lot of new men around here today." "Where's Paul?" he asked. George looked around. "Yeah, a lot of new guys.
I got here this afternoon. You guys were busy setting up lunch, so you probably didn't notice. As for Paul, went up this morning.
Oh, wow. Good for him. I bet he was excited. Did you get to talk to him before you went? George was not eating or drinking. He was just sitting on a tree stump staring off into the late fall sun.
I did get to speak to him, and he was excited. It was then a commotion erupted to the east of them, towards the beginning of the trench system. George stood instantly and looked in that direction.
What's going on? Eamon asked. Suddenly he felt the ground shake. He supposed it had always shook, with shells dropping so often at the front. Had he just never really noticed before? And if so, why was he noticing now? Then he heard the whistles, then the yelling. George looked directly at him. We're falling back. Something's happened. Instinctively, Eamon took towards his food wagon, where he found Mac, Harold, and Alfred frantically hitching the horses, removing the poles and the pots from the fire pit, and loading as much as they could into the wagon. One pot, which was half full of a beef broth with barley and beef pieces, was unceremoniously dumped over the fire. The fire sizzled and a heavy smoke rose from the addition of the moisture. Eamon jumped in to help. He began to dismantle the large tent the four men shared when Mac yelled, "Leave the tent, there's no time." Instead, Eamon decided to try and grab their belongings from the tent. He hurriedly grabbed blankets, clothing including socks and knapsacks, making 3 trips to the wagon to toss the items in. Soon, they were turning the wagon around and following the rest of the army to the west, away from the front lines, and he still had no idea why. They must have traveled 5 miles before they arrived at a clearing where, as it seemed, the forward movement had ceased. Mac jumped down off the wagon and addressed the 3 men. "Wait here, I'll be back." Nervous and curious, the men speculated on what had happened and why they had been forced to move so quickly. It was Harold who suggested that the front line must have been overrun by the Germans. This made sense to Eamon. The shells seemed to be more furious and getting closer. That would explain why he felt the ground shake the way he did. After a few minutes, Mac returned. "Well, Sarge?" Eamon asked. "We're stopping here. The line collapsed. Those that made it out are digging in a few miles behind us." Eamon dropped down off the wagon. "All right." He made his way to the back of the wagon and let down the tailboard and grabbed 3 shovels. "Guess we dig the pit first." Harold took a shovel, as did Alfred. Eamon searched the ground for an appropriate spot. He found one he thought was suitable. "Is here all right, Sarge?" he asked. Still seemingly beside himself, Mac replied with a curt, "Yup," and he walked away towards where the quartermaster was also setting up. It took 2 hours to dig the pit. The men would eat late tonight, if at all, Eamon thought to himself. They had just found wood suitable to use for the mounting of the pole when Eamon noticed something. He dropped the wood he was carrying and took a step towards a tree line where he saw men emerging. He was no longer thinking, just moving, walking towards the men emerging from the trees. He had seen men return from the front before, but never like this. Men using makeshift crutches limping along, men holding arms and men with bandaged faces, men being helped along by others, and more shockingly, men being carried by stretchers. He did not know how long he had stood there staring at these men before he recognized that one was Chauncey. Chauncey was walking with a pronounced limp, using a tree branch to keep himself upright. His left arm hung down limply. He looked miserable. Eamon walked towards him and eventually fell in line beside him. He tapped Chauncey on the shoulder and watched the man jump in fear. "Chauncey, what happened?" Tears filled Chauncey's eyes. "Do I know you? How do you know my name?" "It's me, Eamon, the cook." He watched as Chauncey hung his head and spoke in a low tone. "I remember now. You fed us potatoes. Are you okay? What happened back there?" "We were overrun. It all happened so fast. The Germans started shelling and they kept it up for 2 hours. It was relentless.
They must have started sending men before the shelling was through, because the next thing we knew, the Germans were on top of us, rushing into the trenches, shooting and bayoneting everyone they saw. Eamon looked down at Chauncey's leg. "How did you get out?" Chauncey looked at him. "I hid under Paul." He stopped in his tracks as Chauncey kept his pace. After a moment, he rushed forward again to catch up. "What do you mean, you hid under Paul?" he asked. It was Chauncey's turn to stop now. Sometimes, the only way to save your own skin is to hide under someone who's already dead. They had moved 3 more times over the next week, each one feeling more rushed than the other. Sometimes they moved forwards back to where they began, and sometimes they moved even further back. It had been a chaotic time, a time he remembered even though he wanted to forget it with every fiber of his being. As the months passed, he had stopped getting to know the boys that went to the front. Instead, he chose to only be around his team. Chauncey had been sent home due to his injuries. Paul, he knew, was dead. He had no idea what had happened to Abraham or George. He figured Abraham joined his cousin in death when the line collapsed. As for George, God only knew. Today, he stood in the spring morning dew, ladling out a slurry of barley and water. They tried to pass it off as a porridge, but the men knew better. It was slop. Men thanked him as they passed by. He dared not look up. He dared not joke. He dared not speak. He felt he had learned a valuable lesson that way. If you keep to yourself, you can avoid the pain that comes with the chaos of war. He felt his arm move effortlessly, dipping the label into the slop, moving upwards and tipping over a metal bowl. Then he heard the voice. "Thank you, Eamon." He looked up, and before him stood Abraham. "Abraham, you're alive." Tears filled his eyes. "I was so sorry to hear about Paul." He was in a daze. He heard Abraham speak, but his mind raced and he understood nothing. He blinked hard and realized what it was that had been said. It took a moment to really register. He had said, "Who's Abraham? Who's Paul?" Abraham was gone, and before him stood a stranger. Same uniform as Abraham, same height. He looked around frantically, looking for Abraham, only to realize it had never been him at all.
You've been listening to World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches, where history comes alive through the lives of those who lived it. If this episode moved you, please share it, follow, and leave a rating. Help keep these stories alive. Want to hold these stories in your hand? Explore the books inspired by them, available now on Kindle and in paperback.